any problem is solvable if you know the right questions to ask. If you're brave enough to recognize that you don't know the answer, admit that you don't know the answer, and say, I am going to find that for you and solve those problems. And that's actually one of the things I love about design, because it is so much of it, it is a creative piece, but it also is a lot about problem solving. It's a puzzle. And that piece of it is always just really satisfying to me to find those solutions.
Welcome to Imprint, a podcast about creating a home and life you love. I'm Natalie Walton, an interior designer, stylist, and best-selling author focused on an holistic approach to homes. Each week, I'm sharing insights and interviews about the creative process to help you enhance both your interiors and well-being, as well as provide you with the tools and resources to make considered and sustainable choices with all that you create. Hello everyone, and welcome to Imprint. I'm very excited to share my conversation today with Erin Hiemstra. Some of you may know of her from the blogging days. She had a blog called Apartment 34. We talk about how she transitioned from the world of blogging to now more recently having set up her own design studio called Studio Trovato, which she has with Jeannie Chan. They are based in the San Francisco area, and we talk about setting up your first design business, getting those first clients, how to charge for your services, and also how she shows up on Instagram and seeks inspiration all around her. I really enjoyed learning more about Erin, and I'm sure that you are going to as well. So please enjoy my conversation with Erin Hiemstra. Hi, Erin. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you and really looking forward to learning more about you and your journey and to working in the world of interiors and all things creativity. So I usually like to start at the beginning and find out a little bit about your journey to where you are now. In particular, I'm always curious to know, were you creative as a child? What was your childhood home like? Can you just shine a little bit of a light on that part of your journey? And then I guess moving into more those teenage years where you start to have to think, what am I actually going to do once I leave school? What are my interests? Always curious to learn that.
Yeah, well, first, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be on your podcast. You've been such a long time inspiration to me, so I'm just thrilled to be here. And it's so funny to think about where I am now and going back to my childhood, because I would say I never really thought of myself as a creative kid or person. Like, I didn't consider myself artistic. Was a dancer, so that was an outlet, and I like to write and things like that. But really, I was an athlete. I was very focused on sports. I was very academic. I liked, doing well in school. And I grew up, in the late 70s, early 80s. I did not have a particularly aesthetically um, pleasing home, I would say. I mean, my mother still lives in the rust orange and avocado green um, and goldenrod kitchen of my youth still exists in its exact form. It's actually kind of back in vogue now, I guess. Um, it was just like very 70s rush shag carpet. But when I do think about as my kind of journey into design, has evolved over years and years and years, one thing I did love to do as a child was build Legos. And I would build dream homes out of Legos that had, multiple levels and rooms and all of those things. So that was like one little hint. So I always used to love to meticulously arrange every little item in my bedroom, every little glass figuring on my desk, every stuffed animal along my bed. Everything just had to have its place and be just so. It was kind of my own little universe. So I think that was my other hint. But then I really did not pursue anything creative for years and years after that. I actually went to university and studied political science, and have always been very passionate about politics, which we will not discuss in this podcast. But actually then went on to get a master's degree in public policy from a university in Washington, D.C., and started the first decade of my career out of school in politics. I actually worked for a United States Senator in Washington, D.C., and I'm originally from Seattle. And once I moved back, I did move back to Seattle in the early 2000s, and then I worked exclusively with nonprofit organizations in the arts and education, and was doing that for more than more than a decade before really design got on my radar at all.
Wow, I didn't realize that about you. That's so interesting. So then how did you then start dipping your toe into the world of interiors?
Well, what started it all and what is the the impetus for my long-running design and lifestyle blog, Apartment 34, was the purchase of my first home in Seattle. I bought a condo that was number 34 in a 1904 building in Seattle, kind of a historic, really small building, which not a lot of those exist actually in Seattle because it's not a terribly old city. But it had the original pine floors, it had the original crown molding, but it also had watermelon pink striped wallpaper through the whole apartment. It had metal stamped, beautiful metal stamped treatment on the walls and the ceilings on the kitchen, which was lovely that the previous owner had painted canary yellow. But let's see, what else did it have? But it had beautiful picture rails. It had linoleum, kitchen floor, and bathroom floor. And this was in the very nascent stages of design blogging, where sites like Decorate and Design Sponge and Apartment Therapy were just starting. And I thought, well, I don't really know anything about design, but I know I need to renovate and redesign this apartment. So I'm going to start a blog, and I'm going to talk about my inspirations, and I'm going to ask for advice and see what happens, basically. And that was in about 2007, I think. And it was, obviously just a hobby that I was doing at night. I had a full-time day job. Really didn't know what I was talking about. I knew what I liked and didn't like. And so I just started sharing inspirations and ideas. And I think the best thing I ever did was I just did it consistently. I did it every day. It became it became a creative outlet. It became a community very quickly. It was so different back then. Um, Made amazing connections with people all around the world, many of whom I'm still in touch with today. And that's really how it all started. Of course, cut to a few years, I never actually ended up renovating that apartment because 6 months after I purchased it, I met my now husband. And, a year or two after that, we moved in together and ended up leaving Seattle and moving to San Francisco. So, apartment 34, I did take down the watermelon pink wallpaper. That did go away. It got repainted. But other than that, I really never got to realize my renovation dreams in that space. But that's kind of what sparked it all.
I'm curious for you because I was blogging around the same time. I actually just quickly looked because I'm so bad at remembering dates. And I had a blog called Daily Imprint, which I started in 2007. So it was very
Oh,
much
so
around that same period of time. And like you say, like people were very supportive of each other and sharing. And I think for me, it was such a creative outlet. And I'm just curious for you, at what point did you, with that, start thinking, like I'm really enjoying this whole world? Did you monetize the blog? Did you have ideas of taking it full time? Can you just talk us through like that kind of period of having the blog and thinking about your eyes opening, I guess, to a whole new world and thinking, do I continue with my day job or do I start to pursue something new?
such an organic growth and, a time of everything just kind of happening in real time because no one had done anything like that before. So it was just a natural evolution. As I said, it was, something I did in the evenings that I was just a passion project that I just loved, but it just kept growing and growing and growing and growing. And by that time I was working, my day job was as I mentioned, in marketing. and communications and events, which was also a slight creative outlet for nonprofit organizations. But the blog just kept going and going. Then, of course, I got engaged and planned a wedding. Blogging about weddings was very big back then. So I got to incorporate that into my site. I started talking more. That was the first time that I ever actually started talking about myself. I had been that was in 2010. I stayed fully anonymous in the blogging world for the first 3.5 years, because I didn't ever want anything to be about me or have anyone actually know anything about me personally. Um, but when the wedding piece came up, then obviously that was a huge just part of my life. And so I was, it was again, very organic. I was always just talking about what I was passionate about and obsessed with at that moment. So that continued to help it grow. And then my wedding was featured on large wedding blogs like Style Me Pretty and, all Green Wedding Shoes, these sites, and Martha Stewart. And it just, again, it kind of took on a life of its own. It just kept growing and growing and growing. And I was enjoying it so much. And when my then husband and I relocated from Seattle to San Francisco, it was the opportunity for me to kind of reevaluate what I wanted to do, because we relocated for his job. And I assumed that I was just going to keep working in PR and marketing, and that's what I was going to do. But monetization had become a piece of it back then. It was display advertising. I mean, can you imagine anyone making money off of display advertising now? But you could sell banner ads on your site and make real money. And so I had started doing that. So there was a revenue generation piece that was starting to happen. Affiliate marketing wasn't really a thing yet, so it wasn't about linking to products or making any revenue that way. But after about, I can't remember now if it was 6 months to maybe 9 months after we'd moved to San Francisco, and I was working in a PR agency, and all the clients were technology companies, finance, like just really dry stuff. And my site had still just kept growing and growing and growing. And I just said, I'm miserable. I want to try this. Can't I? Let me go for 6 months. I'm going to try it for 6 months and see what happens. And in less than a year, I had 5 employees. I was by that point producing almost all of my own original content. And that was probably 2012. 2013, I ended up, or I can't remember now if it actually was 2013 or 2014, or no, it must have been 2013. I got tapped by Sunset Magazine, a very well-known long-running magazine that's based here in California. At that point, it was based in Palo Alto. I got tapped to be one of 5 up-and-coming designers to design a room in their Sunset Idea House, an annual design challenge that they did. And so then it was off to the races. And I was just all in. We were producing entertaining stories and dinner party stories and design and decorating stories, because now I had, a new apartment in San Francisco that needed to get decorated. And, we moved multiple times. And so all of a sudden it was just constant content creation and just constant inspiration, travel. I mean, that was the heyday. That was definitely the most fun. All of a sudden I was going to New York Fashion Week, and I was attending design conferences and blogging conferences, and it was a whole moment. And I still to this day feel incredibly lucky that I hit that wave when I did, because it pulled me into this incredibly inspiring community, primarily of women, but that I still am inspired by. And I mean, I'm thinking of my Instagram feed right now, and just, literally hundreds of people that I follow, that I have known and followed and met in person, have known for, 15 years or more now, which is kind of mind-boggling.
So tell us then, what happened next? Because obviously we all know that blogs kind of petered out a little bit and Instagram took over. And I'm curious, you're talking about having 5 people working with you. I mean, that's exciting, but it's also a kind of big responsibility as well. How did you pivot during that time?
Yeah. Well, another little, very little known fact about my history is along with the political side of my background, at the height of my blog, I was also doing consulting work on content. And and I ended up working with Williams Sonoma, the family of Williams brands at Williams Sonoma, which is, obviously a large company based here in San Francisco. And after working with them to help them launch a new brand within the company, I got offered a job, a full-time job there. And I still had my blog and I still had employees. But my husband and I knew that we were going to maybe want to have kids and we wanted to purchase a home. And so I thought it was a brilliant idea to take the full-time corporate job and still attempt to run my business with
Wow.
my employees. That did not go quite as well as I had hoped. I think my stomach was a little bit too big, brain and tigs. I don't know what the right metaphor is, but yeah, that did not work out quite as well. I could not manage a high pressure corporate job and run my own business and be an effective boss um, at all. It happened to coincide with that time where blogs started shifting. YouTube was really coming in huge. Instagram had been invented by this time. Twitter, when we started in 2007, none of Pinterest, Twitter, Instagram, none of them existed.
Yeah.
It's just fascinating to think about all of the things that we had to do. Um, I, had to learn as we went. So things were starting to shift. I also ended up having a son in 2015. And so my priorities then, of course, significantly shifted. And so I started trying to figure out how to balance it all. And the first thing that actually fell off was the corporate job. I decided that I couldn't, that it wasn't the spot for me, that I really did enjoy the creative entrepreneurship, and that's what I was most passionate about. So I ended up leaving. But of course, in that interim time, my website had shrunk a little bit because I wasn't able to devote nearly as much of my dedicated time and attention and focus on it. So after I left Williams Sonoma, my son was about a year old, and my business went back down to just me. And that was an interesting transition. I was really trying to figure out, what I was passionate about by this point. We had moved twice, so I had decorated another apartment in the city, but we really wanted to purchase a home. And so actually, I'm even thinking about it in real time. The other major moment was in 2014. My husband and I had been house hunting. I'm sure people have read the news stories that San Francisco is a notoriously horrible place to attempt to buy a home. It's incredibly expensive. It's insanely competitive, particularly back then. Things have shifted a little now in our post-pandemic times, but in the before times, it was crazy. We lost, I think, 6 or 8 houses that we had attempted to make bids on. We had been looking for more than 9 months. And then we stumbled on a 150-year-old Victorian in a lesser known part of the city that we're only the fifth owners. So it had only had 4 owners at the time. And it had not been touched since probably the early 1970s. And it was a hot mess. And I walked in and immediately said, yes, this is the house we need to buy. we have to, this is it. And by some miracle, we got it. And so that was another huge shift because that was in the summer of 2014. My son was born in 2015, which is when we started the renovation process. And I left my full-time corporate job just before he turned a year. So we were thick in the design and renovation, of which I did all of the design work myself. during that time. And that's when I really realized, like, okay, I really love this. I'm really, I loved creating the content, but as content got more and more sponsored and more, being driven by branded content, that actually was less fulfilling to me than just a fully immersive creative process that was very open ended and didn't kind of have brand guidelines or an agenda behind it. So the in about, I would say, 2016, 2017, my joy and love of blogging really began to diminish. As the pressures of it mounted, it became harder and harder to generate revenue. There were so many platforms that you had to create content for, so the workload increased dramatically while the revenue was, at least in my experience, was decreasing. So it became harder and harder to feel really motivated. And of course, the community changed. I mean, it used to be you would post a blog post and you would get hundreds of comments and be engaging in dialogue with these commenters. I mean, I am friends with people that I met who just followed my site, and to have that kind of fall off as our attention span shrank, and the number of characters that we were allowed to type on Twitter and everything got tiny, that level of connection also began to recede. And I think that also took away some of the joy of it for me.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's all so vivid. I mean, you're bringing in all the memories back of all of
Right,
those things.
right.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I was the same in the sense of, I kind of worked in a magazine background, and so much of that was driven by advertising and tailoring things to advertisers. And when blogs kind of went down that path, I was like, I just wasn't interested in personally doing that kind of thing. I know that you can monetize things in that way. But I don't know. I was with you in the sense of just really wanting to pursue the creative side of it. So then what happened next then? So how did you fill us in the gaps between then and then where you are now?
Yeah. So I did keep the blog trucking along, and I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I did begin to say to friends, so I won't take all the blame. Obviously, it's not entirely my fault, but I did start saying to friends, if I'm still blogging when I'm 40, will someone please stop me? Like, I need to figure out what my next evolution is going to be. Well, I turned 40 in November of 2019. And we all know what happened in early 2020.
Yeah.
So apologies. I put that out into the universe that something dramatic needed to happen so that I would stop blogging, and the entire world shut down.
It was you,
Apologies
Erin.
to everyone. No, definitely not. It was the pandemic that was the catalyst really to make me fully shift, because my husband and I, bless him, did attempt. He was fully supportive that that was my business and what I did, and I was going to keep doing it. So we attempted to work. Each of us work part time and take care of my son, who was 4 at the time. Just turned 4. Actually, he turned 4 during the pandemic. And we almost lost our minds, and we're teetering on the edge of divorce, I think. And so I said, okay, I will stop. You work full time, obviously, like, that makes more sense from an economic perspective, and I will stop. And for however, we don't know how long this is going to go on, and we will just figure it out. Luckily, at that point, I had completed the renovation of our home in San Francisco, and in September of 2019, it was photographed and featured in January of 2020 in Domino magazine, which was a huge milestone for me and a real honor. And just, I was so proud to have this space published and out in the world. And I had collaborated with a couple of interior designer friends. And of course, I have a huge friend group of designers in the Bay Area, because I've been in that space for more than a decade. And I began thinking like, oh, and I loved doing our house so much. And I was thinking, is that something I could do? But, do I really have a background? Do I really have the credentials? A lot of imposter syndrome was in my head, a lot of fear, quite honestly. But I was just percolating. And then during the pandemic, I ended up renovating another home and designing that home. So I did another huge renovation, managed another huge renovation project. And, still just in the back of my mind, started thinking people over the years have DM'd me and asked, like, do you do design? Could you help me with this room? Could you help me with a kitchen? Could you help me with that? And occasionally I would say yes, but I was like, well, no, that's not, I'm a blogger. That's not actually what I do. I don't know. Would anyone actually trust my vision or my creativity? I feel so insecure. And then coming out of the pandemic, one of my closest friends in San Francisco, who I met through blogging more than a decade ago, who she also has a background in the creative world. She actually had run her own paper goods company for about 7 years, but she had also renovated a home during the pandemic. And as we came out of things in 2022, we had a lunch and we said, we're both ready to do new things. It feels like kind of a rebirth moment for everyone. Um, my passion for design is just like going gangbusters. Hers was too. And we said, well, what if we start something together? And what started as a conversation over a casual sushi lunch, I think maybe the first restaurant I'd eaten at in 2 years, or 2.5 years, however long it was, turned into what is now called Studio Trovato, which is an interior consultancy that we soft launched in the summer of 2022 and officially launched actually a year ago right now, in San Francisco. And we offer in really the full range of interior design services, but we differentiate ourselves in that see ourselves as creative directors. We'll help you set the creative direction for your house. We'll help you source. We can help you manage renovations. We really can plug into anyone's design needs. We're looking to match with folks who really have a connoisseur's mindset, are passionate about slow design, vintage, local artisans. We feel like both of us have felt like interiors have kind of gone the way of fast fashion a little bit, where the trend cycle had gotten so fast and it was all about, well, here's the next color of the year and here's the next, you need these pillows for this season and this curtains for that season. And this idea that you should be changing your home every 3 months, which we just thought was kind of ludicrous. And that in fact, the opposite is true, that a home should just be a very slow evolution that follows you along on your own life journey. My homes have certainly done that. I would be almost embarrassed if anyone was to Google the original apartments that I had featured on different design blogs in the early 2010s, because my aesthetic is nothing like it was 15 years ago. And so we're really excited to be now working with private clients, residential projects, commercial projects. We're working in hospitality, and it's really a dream come true. It's been just absolutely fantastic, and I'm loving every second of it.
That's so good. I'm definitely going to kind of loop back or come back to your own style, and I've got so many questions about that. But just with this business, Studio Trovato, I mean, you've sort of touched on a little bit some of the projects that you're working on, but something that comes up, I teach a couple of courses, like on styling and some other ones, and something that comes up so often. Yes. Good to hear.
I took them years and years ago.
There we go, everyone. An endorsement from Erin.
Strongly endorsed.
What comes up though for so many people is that, kind of like you and me, people have this, they discover this love of interiors and they want to do something in the world of interiors. But like you say, they have all these imposter syndrome kind of elements of like, oh, but I haven't gone to design school or I haven't done this. First of all, I'm curious to learn, how you kind of reframe that. And secondly, I would also like to dig in a little bit. How do you get your first clients? Like, how have you, and that renovation project, you said you renovated your home and then you did another renovation. Was that for somebody else or was that for yourself? I'm just curious about that, that transition as well.
Oh, yes, exactly. No, totally. And I'm constantly interested in how other designers have done it as well. Yeah, that the second renovation was actually also for ourselves. We ended up purchasing a home closer to family in a really rural area back near Seattle. And 2 days before we closed on that property, it flooded.
Oh,
It completely flooded out and did, tens of thousands of dollars of damage. And so all of a sudden, we had not planned on renovating it. A renovation was required because we had to rip out floors and we had to rip out drywall and redo really half of the house. And so at that point, we were like, well, we're in it now. So here we go. Um, and so that was actually a really fascinating experience because that was during the pandemic. And so I was designing everything and managing the remodel remotely. I was able, to travel really sporadically. We would drive actually from San Francisco to Washington State because no one was flying. It takes 12 and a half hours door to door,
oh
by the way. If you only
gosh.
make 3 stops, we got it down to a science to cross three states in the United States. Um, but that was an amazing experience. I think that definitely, boosted my confidence a little bit that I could manage a GC and a general contractor and manage subcontractors and source materials and, get everything there and get everything installed and all of those things, even if I wasn't on site. Um,
It's kind of one of
Granted,
those experiences that you kind of, I'm sure you probably think like, if I could do that, I can do anything, especially when you're
exactly,
going back to the bones as well.
exactly. So that was back to your question of, how have I gotten to myself being like, yes, I can step into this world of design. I would say, that project was a big confidence boost that, you know, I do have experience under my belt. I am beginning to understand this world. And I would also say I really looked back at, I didn't go to design school for 2 years or 4 years or get a certificate, but I've been in design school for the last 15 years and just have been immersed in it from a million different perspectives, whether that's in-house at a major, you know, home furnishings company, understand learning about the, home furnishings retail business and how home goods are made to then, being in design media and following design trends and the industry for literally 15 years, and just constantly learning. And so I also realized that you're not an island. You don't do this alone. And there are a plethora of experts. And that's one thing I think that, really just comes not only from experience, but also just age, just where I am in life, realizing you recognize your strengths and play to those strengths and then understand your weaknesses and buttress them with people who can help you. And that's exactly how we've structured Studio Trovato. So when we need expertise that we don't have, we bring it in from the outside. And that is, any problem is solvable if you know the right questions to ask. If you're brave enough to recognize that you don't know the answer, admit that you don't know the answer, and say, I am going to find that for you and solve those problems. And that's actually one of the things I love about design, because it is so much of it, it is a creative piece, but it also is a lot about problem solving. It's a puzzle. And that piece of it is always just really satisfying to me to find those solutions.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's so much there. I mean, I think, like you said, I mean, my experience is similar as well. That I haven't gone down the traditional route, and in terms of going to design school, but being immersed in this world in so many different ways over the past 15 or so years. And I think that there are so many facets to it, and having a very confident sense of your own style is a huge part of it. Before we talk about that, though, I do want to just touch back on again that idea of getting those first clients, because I think that's such a hurdle for so many people. Of they want to work
Yes.
in the world of interiors, but it's like, but how do you get people to take you on, or become, for them to become your client, and then charging for your services? I love asking this because I think it's something that holds so many people back, and it's kind of like this enigma to so many people.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, I feel like I do have a little bit of luck on my side in that because I did have apartment 34 for so long. I do still, the blog is not currently maintained anymore. The site still exists. You can still go there, and all of the archives are there. But I haven't maintained the site since kind of mid-pandemic. But I do maintain my Instagram. I have a really large Pinterest following. So I did have platforms that I could announce basically that I was offering design services. I had taken on some clients individually, and then when Jeannie Chan and my business partner and I teamed up, I had a couple of clients that had been referred to me or literally had shown up in my DMs and said, I really love your style. I really love your aesthetic. Would you be willing to help me with this room? And, small projects, help me update my kids' rooms or help me, figure out how to remodel my kitchen. And I started saying yes to those. So I had a couple of clients on board that I was just doing privately when we decided to launch Studio Trovato. So we kind of saw those as kind of our kind of test ground. How would this go? Would we work well together? Would the clients be happy? Were we happy, really stepping into this world and saying, we're going to start offering these services? Because design really is it is a service industry. And that's a really critical piece of it. It's not just creating pretty spaces. And that was going really, really well. And so then the two of us made announcements really across our social platforms and started offering hour-long consulting calls, and as a means of basically entree to potential clients, and also entree to people who were interested in our perspective and our expertise, but might not have the funds to do a big project right away, but just, wanted advice on a sofa, or maybe how to, renovate a bathroom, or just bought a house. How would they even go about furnishing it? And so that's really where we started, was just offering hour-long consulting sessions, and we still continue to do that. We don't have nearly as many slots open these days. So we do it on kind of a small, kind of exclusive basis. Basically, we'll announce when we have, half a dozen slots available, and when they're booked, they're booked. But that's been extremely successful. I'm sure you've heard of The Expert here in the United States. I feel like it's a model that a lot of people are trying out. I just read about another company based in either the UK or Sweden that's also starting something similar, allowing designers to do these kind of hour-long consulting sessions, and we've found them to be very fruitful.
And how did you work out how much to charge, particularly if there's two of you as well? I'm curious how you divvy up the roles within what you do.
Yes, it's worked out extremely well. I serve as the creative director for our studio and really lead that initial creative direction for any of the projects that we're taking on. And my business partner Jeannie is our chief operating officer, and she of course contributes creatively to all of our projects, but she's really keeping all of the trains running on time and steps in and leads as we begin more of the sourcing and procurement stage of a project, because she loves to hunt for that like perfect piece. That is her just like her passion, and I love setting that 40,000 foot vision. But that is an excellent question of trying to figure out how to charge, and we certainly talked about that. There's large debates happening in the design industry. Should you charge hourly? Should you charge a percentage basis of a budget? And we are keeping things very flexible right now. As you know, we've only been in business for a year. We're still really seeing what works for our clients, and I think it also really depends on where you are geographically and where your clients are geographically. And thus far, at least all of our clients happen to be in the Bay Area. I will put out there and manifest that my dream scenario is to actually have international clients and to be working, around the world. But right now we are based in the Bay Area. So we've really modeled our rates and our billing structure kind of just on what the kind of industry standard is in this geographic area.
And is that an hourly rate, or do you do like a package, or how roughly, like
We
how do
off
you,
we
or
offer both.
both?
So we do
Right.
primarily we do it because people's comfort levels vary. So in some instances, for example, our hospitality clients, commercial clients, it's more typically a percentage based fee structure, whereas a number of our residential clients preferred hourly rates, particularly if the project is smaller in scale. That just has made more sense and has worked really well.
And so, actually, one more practical kind of question. So, do you do you outsource kind of the design drawing side of things, or are there elements that you design sort of outsource, or is that not something that you offer as part of your service, or did you actually teach yourself how to use design programs?
I do know I've taught myself how to use things like SketchUp, but any type of technical drawing, construction drawings, CAD that we bring in, we've actually brought on members to our studio that are architects and things that do that for us. So we've got that um, expertise within the studio to produce construction drawings or any technical specifications that are necessary for projects.
I think that's so helpful to share. And, I hear this a lot from many interior designers that, you can outsource these things. And there are people who specialize in, the drawing side of design. And there are so many different areas of specialty. And I think sometimes that's something that holds a lot of people back, that like, but I don't know how to do the technical drawings. But you might have so many skills and so many things to offer to clients beyond that, and that is something that you can loop in with someone else and kind of or outsource it as it were. So I just, it's really
Exactly.
interesting to me. I hear it so often from interior designers, and yet it's one of those like biggest stumbling blocks for so many people who are considering moving into the world of interiors, of not knowing how to do that. So yeah, I think that's really great that you
It
share.
really is. And I would say, in this world now where you can be connected with anyone around the world, I mean, just the example of 3D renderings, which are, obviously and becoming more and more kind of the industry standard. But I don't have the technological capability to create a 3D render. But there's literally I've found people and companies who do it just on Instagram and I have a whole database of different companies and or individuals that we could go to for 3D renders who are all over the world. People in Australia, people in South Africa, people in Eastern Europe, South America. You don't think that just because you can't do everything yourself that you're not capable and that you can't bring value to a client, or that you're not a designer. Because I don't ever tell anyone, oh, well, I'm an interior designer, because no, I didn't go to school for that. But I have a vision and I have a perspective and I have a passion and can help someone realize the vision for their home. And that's what I've realized. If you are capable of doing that, then you are capable of stepping into this industry. Now, am I going to be capable of running a successful business in the industry? Time will tell. I'm a year in, but I have very high hopes.
I'm sure you can do it. If you can do that renovation in the middle of a pandemic, you can do anything. I'm sure of it. So let's talk about your style. You've mentioned that you grew up in a home with avocado and I think you said orange. You lived in an apartment with pink and white striped walls. How would you describe your own personal style and how has that evolved over the years?
That's an excellent question. I would say I'm one of those people who point of view has definitely evolved with my life, my lifestyle, where I've been slowly over time. I'm not one of those, you see those people who just like have such a distinct personal style and it's kind of who they were since they were a child and it's just always stuck with them. And I was always a little bit envious of those people because I felt like I was often searching for my style. But now that I've kind of hit this life stage, I feel like, well, no, I was just information gathering really my whole life and really coming to have confidence in my own point of view. I think it was always a bit shaky for a really long time. I wasn't sure, I was very easily influenced by what I was around or where I was located, what other people were doing. But I've really honed in on this style of what I call casual elegance, where there's a little bit of a refined and sophisticated edge to my aesthetic, but it's still relaxed, it's still comfortable, um, it's still approachable, but in a way that's just a little bit elevated. Um, is really how I've come to describe it. And I've actually had other people say that to me and I'm like, oh, okay, then I think we've hit the sweet spot. If someone else can describe my aesthetic in a way that I'm like, yes, that's it. um I think I've really found, and my business partner and I are both kind of the same mind. We take a lot of influence, international influence. I'm actually very influenced by Australian designers. I have followed Australian design magazines for years, more than a decade, and love the interior design that comes out of Australia. And similarly with design that comes out of Scandinavia. So our aesthetic is a little bit of a combination of those things with a little bit of Asian influence thrown in. And then, of course, we are in California, so we get a little bit of that California casual, but just a hint. Like that isn't really our inspiration. That's a very, I think, specific aesthetic that anyone could immediately visualize. And that's not really what we're interested in producing. We're very passionate about vintage and bespoke and finding those unique pieces that offer soul and personal story to a space.
And what I remember from your style, and that's what I'm curious about, because obviously you've been in so many of these very colorful homes, is that, I mean, you do have quite a neutral color palette within your interiors, don't you?
It's true. Yes, I have a slight aversion to color. I love color, and I will proudly say that actually a project that we're working on right now happens to be a couple who are originally from Australia, and they love color. And so I'm really being pushed out of my own personal design comfort zone um, in that project, but it's been so much fun to stretch in that way. But I think because I'm constantly looking at design and inspiration, art, and just really always taking in visual stimulation, I feel like my own personal spaces need to be neutral for the most part so that just my eyes and brain can rest a little bit. I also think it's my antidote to having a small child because there are lots of very colorful and loud toys in my house. So the rest of the space has to be neutral so that those don't drive me crazy.
Yeah, don't worry, I can relate to that as well. Now, I wanted to ask you as well about Instagram. I'm curious on your take on it. obviously, we've touched on that you kind of come from the blogging world, how you've transitioned to Instagram, how you choose to show up on there, what works for you. I think Instagram is kind of like that love hate, sometimes exhaustion kind of feeling for so many people. What's your relationship with
For
Instagram, and
sure.
how do you choose to use it?
Oh, that's a, that is it. We're going deep now here, Natalie. That is a loaded question. The love-hate relationship with our dear old Instagram. I'll date myself terribly then that, I have rebelled against Reels in such an intense way where I just have that is just the line where I was like, I do not do video. I will not. And hence my Instagram is basically like it's non-existent because if you don't do video, your content is not seen. So I do have a really strong love-hate relationship with Instagram. I loved it dearly for so long. Really engaged with it significantly, thought it was a fantastic platform, and have really struggled in the last few years since they've really buried anybody's content that isn't a reel and, just try to compete with TikTok, which is another platform that I refuse to do because I am old and I just can't do dances. I can't be funny in 15 seconds. I'm just like, I know my limit, people. And my limit is Reels and TikTok. So Instagram is a bit of a conundrum for me right now because and I'm being totally candid. I still really obsess about the aesthetics of the images that I post, which I know, or at least I understand, is very antiquated now. The kids all want authenticity and, real, just like the messiness of life. And it's just really hard for me to ever want to share that because that's just not, I spent a decade just creating beautifully curated images and feed and like obsessed about the order of the images on the grid, which no one looks at now, which I intellectually know, but I still can't drop the obsession. So I'm trying to just release my attachment to success, quote unquote success on Instagram, whatever that definition is, whether that's followers or likes on a post. And I'm just trying to post the way I used to, which is when I feel inspired, when it's authentically something that I want to share, when it's a beautiful image. I have dipped into Reels a little bit, but they take me hours and embarrassingly, I mean, it really takes me so much time to do a reel. I need a consultant to help me with my reels. I need a freelancer. I need to outsource that. But I know it's such a key piece of marketing, especially for designers. I mean, some of my favorite designers who I think are doing spectacular work are also brilliant marketers on Instagram and have hundreds of thousands of followers and, get tons of comments. And that is where they are getting clients. I mean, we have to be real. And the conversation that I'm constantly hearing and design podcasts and things now is, is our clients going to come from TikTok? And a lot of people are saying, yeah, you got to be on TikTok if you want to get clients because that's where clients are going to be. Um, I've yet to see that come to fruition. The clients that we've been getting are all mostly through referrals and through our consulting, as I mentioned, our hourly consulting, which I mentioned earlier. So I'm trying to release the pressure on Instagram and just let it go back to being an inspirational and fun platform. And it is such a huge tool now too, because it's where I find woodworkers and other vendors and artisans that I'm working with. It's where I find artists that I want to maybe commission pieces for projects. It's where I find, a new lighting designer or new tile or stone that is where I now rabbit hole on Instagram is with it as a tool for my business, less than a broadcast tool about my business, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's going to be so interesting to see. I feel like I know everyone's talking about TikTok, but I feel that unless Instagram pivots in some way, I feel people are more and more disenchanted with it. I feel that there's going to be something
Hmm.
else that comes along. I know some people have mentioned a few other things, but when I've looked at them, it's like, no, there's not that momentum behind it. Like there's got to be enough momentum. And I mean, yeah, it'll just be really interesting to see how it all evolves. So I was just curious on your take and perspective on it. Because I mean, as you said, I mean, you still have managed to find kind of clients, and I certainly use it for finding, various, like you say, trades and crafts people and artists and all of those things. So it is a great tool in some ways, but yeah, it's a really interesting one. So I also, just before I go on to the last questions that I ask everyone, I also just wanted to ask you a little bit about how you structure your days, your weeks, your projects, your process. I think it's always really interesting to get a little bit of an insight into that, and I'm always curious to learn. So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky in that the industry of interior design gives you a lot of flexibility, which is great because I think my brain works better that way to not have a very, you know, strapped to a desk 9 to 5 scenario. So I'm always jumping from one thing to the next. As I mentioned earlier, I have a young son. So, my mornings often start just getting everybody out the door and off. Just, we've just started a new school year here in the States. And so we're started a new grade. We're back in the school routine. So it's getting everyone out the door. And then I'm coming back home and I might start my morning. I try to start my morning with something inspirational rather than just, jumping into email or the to-do list. So I like to either, read design articles or give myself 20 minutes to flip through the latest design magazine. I'm still really passionate about print magazines. I've always loved print magazines, and luckily we have a couple of shops left in San Francisco that still sell design magazines from around the world. So I make, usually in at least once a month, if not every other week, trip to pick up, whether that's World of Interiors or Belle or Vogue Living or, House and Garden from the UK or Elle Decoration, all of them. So things like that. And then I usually dive into creative things in the morning. I feel like that's where I have the most inspiration. So whether that's, working on a concept for a client or um, sourcing things or working on a furniture plan for a room. And then in the afternoons, as my energy starts to wane, that's where I shift gears into my administrative tasks. And that is one of the other reasons why Jeannie and I started Studio Trovato. Trovato is to find in Italian. Um, so that's where Trovare comes from. And we really wanted to structure our business in a way that also works for our lives. We're both busy moms and have young children. And so it gives us the flexibility to be able to, pause in the afternoons and do school pickups and schlepping kids to sports and all of those activities. And then to be able to pick things back up in the evenings if necessary. But really that was the other thing, is I wanted to create a balance in my life of, I think the pandemic has taught us all that there are certain things that are really important, one of which is family and personal time and personal care. um, I make a point to work out regularly. I love to cook, so I try to cook dinner for my family every night. That's one of my ways that I really relax. um, so that is really how my day is structured. But today is, my husband's traveling for business. I'm solo parenting. I had a client have a hardware catastrophe during an installation today. So I was running around San Francisco trying to find the right sized cabinet pulls because they had to be installed today because the installer couldn't come back for a month. So, I spent the day frantically driving all around the city to find these polls, which we did at the last second before I had to pick my son up from school and take him to his practice. So it's never a dull moment.
Yeah. But that's kind of the joy of it as well, isn't it? That, that it's not necessarily just sitting at a desk, 9 to 5, and, that it offers that flexibility, but you can also do, yeah, there's the variety and the fun, and you can see things come to life as well, which is great.
Yeah, we've done things like my Jeannie and I have instituted, like, once a month we have to do an inspirational um, day of some kind, whether that's going to SF MoMA or going to, smaller art galleries, or, going to the San Francisco show house, just something that kind of feeds our creativity. And then we try to go eat at the newest restaurants because we love restaurant and commercial design. So we make sure that twice a month we go out to lunch and go to a new restaurant and just see, what's happening in that. So that we always look for ways to just kind of feed that creative engine too, which is, I feel so lucky that the industry affords you that ability to set your days and make sure that your energy is always sustained.
Yeah, so good. All right, we're going to go into the final questions that I always ask everyone. So, first of all, which 5 words best describe you?
That is such a good question. I would say energetic, um, a little outspoken, um, nitpicky, um, um, driven, and a dreamer.
What's the best lesson that you've learned? It could be in life, business. What's one of the best lessons you've learned?
I think the best lesson I've learned is to, when it's uh, say yes only when it's a hell yes. D-
Mm,
but say yes to those yeses. Don't be afraid to say yes to those. But if it's not that, don't be afraid to say no. But that's not right for me. That doesn't seem like the right path. Because you'll come to regret those less enthusiastic yeses. But don't be afraid when your gut says, "Oh, this is." It could be. I walked away from a career in academic history and took a total left turn, and I don't regret it for a second.
yeah, I'm always relearning that lesson as well. You know, when you say yes to something and it's like you sort of halfway through and you're thinking, I really wish I hadn't have said yes to this. I think particularly when you're a parent and you've got such limited time, and it's like you really want to make sure you really focus on the things that just really energize you and excite you. And anyway, that's a story for another day.
It,
Um,
for sure, but it makes a huge difference. It really does.
yeah. What's your proudest achievement?
Oh, that's a good question too. I think my proudest achievement is the fact that I have made this pivot. Um, I don't have necessarily an achievement to show for it yet. We don't have any projects that are publishable, but just the fact that I'm in the weeds and doing it and trying and being brave in this space, I feel very proud about that because it took me a lot of years to get here.
What's been your best decision?
Oh, that's a really good question too. I think my best decision, I do think timing and location influence a lot of how things go in your life. And I will sadly say that one of our best decisions was to relocate to San Francisco. Um, I do love it, and it immersed me in such an amazing, supportive, creative community that really fed the trajectory of the last decade of my life.
Yeah, it's funny. I kind of know of so many people now who, well, I mean, when I say so many, a handful, but of people like Shira Gill, who I've interviewed for this podcast, Caitlin
Yes,
Fleming.
of
You're
course.
all
Her
in,
book came out
yeah,
today.
yeah, you're all in that area. So, and I've never been to San
Yeah.
Francisco, so I'm definitely going to have to be on my trip list
Oh,
one time.
we need you to come for sure. Yeah, it is a hotbed of creativity, and particularly um, entrepreneurial creative women. And the community is very supportive. It's not a competitive or it's a really San Francisco is a big city, but it's a small big city. You kind of feel like you're almost like in a town, and everyone kind of knows everyone. It's really lovely that way.
So, who inspires you?
Oh, I take inspiration from so many people constantly. I mean, I am so inspired by the design world writ large, whether it's design photographers, stylists, other designers, historical designers, reading, a book about the history of Charlotte Perrand. I take inspiration really just from everyone around me. I don't think I could name a single source um, because I'm literally in awe of what I see people producing all the time.
What are you passionate about?
I'm really passionate about this idea of slow design and shifting the perspective in the interior design industry that, in 6 months or 9 months or 12 months or 14 months, your home should be quote unquote done. I'm 8 years into our historic Victorian, and it is far from done. Far, far, far from done. But I'm happy about that because my life has evolved and changed, and how we live in the house has evolved and changed. And I'm waiting to find the right pieces, and make the right design choices rather than the right now choices. And I think it's better for our mental health, it's better for our checkbooks, and it's better for our planet long term to think about design in that way.
I love that. The right choices rather than the right choices now. What dream do you still want to fulfill?
I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but an ultimate dream is I would love to design space design internationally, whether that's residential or hospitality. I would love to work on, a small hotel in Mallorca or something. I just have, I have such an affinity. I've spent a lot of time in Italy. I'm really inspired by the Puglia region. There's been amazing vacation, and the vacation rental space I think is really fascinating. Um, so putting out, if anyone wants me to help them design their vacation rental, that's the a home that we purchased in Washington State. That was a vacation rental property that I designed, and I just find they're very fun when it's not something that someone's living in full time. There's kind of a freedom to the design that you get to enjoy that you don't necessarily have when you need to baby proof something, or make sure that sofa is good for pets or things like that.
Yeah, no, completely. And you're also not designing for like holding all your stuff. It's the kind of, you need to
Exactly.
have enough storage to, for your suitcase of clothes, but and obviously kitchen equipment and so on. But it doesn't have to be, so intricately designed in terms of like all the storage of like the winter gear and the this and the that and the other. So yeah, no, I can see that.
Exactly.
Yeah. What are you reading right now? What's on your coffee table or on your nightstand? What's something you're reading at the moment?
Well, I feel like I have to plug. I mean, everyone and their mom has come out with a design book this fall, and they're all fantastic. I mean, you mentioned Caitlin Thumling, a longtime friend of mine. Her new book, Sense of Place, just came out. Heidi Collier's book just came out. Jake Arnold's book just came out. Uh, let's see. Amber Interior's book is about to come out. Shay McGee's book just came out. Studio Shashiri's book. I mean, there's just been my stack of design books is massive, and I am one of those nerds who literally reads every single one cover to cover. I love them, but I do try to step away from. I really could just read about design, whether it's magazines, books, all day long. But I just started reading Rick Rubin's book on creativity, which is very fun. I highly recommend. He comes from the music world, but that's a fantastic one. Um, but I really can just sit there, whether I'm reading an article, in T Magazine from the New York Times, or yeah, flipping through one of my design books. That is usually what I'm reading.
I'm curious, do
It's a little
you read?
embarrassing.
No, no, no. I'm curious, do you read them before you go to bed? Because that's for me, I think it's too much, it's too close to work. And so I can't read those kind
Yeah.
of books before bedtime. And so I tend to read something else, even if it's something completely different. I mean, like at the moment, I'm reading this book called Platonic, which is about friendships in adulthood, which is really, really interesting. So it can
Oh,
be
that would be
something
fascinating.
completely different. Yeah. So it can be something completely different, but I can't read design books before bed.
Yeah, I am embarrassed to admit that I am not a nighttime reader because I am usually so tired at the end of the day that if I attempt to read, whether it be, a nonfiction book or a novel, I'll read 4 or 5 pages and then start falling asleep and not remember what I read, and then just read the same 4 or 5 pages the next night and then the next night. And then, so I never get through a book that way. So I am embarrassed to admit that the way I go to sleep is I usually scroll Instagram for about 15 minutes and then I go to bed.
I'm sure, like,
I
yeah,
take in
it will
visual
come.
inspiration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure it will come when your son gets a little bit older too. What are you listening
Yeah.
to? Do you like to listen to podcasts? I think you mentioned some design podcasts. What are some of your favorites?
Yeah, I do listen to a lot of design podcasts, Business of Home, and just really any design. I did really start listening to design podcasts, although I will say this summer I got really addicted to Smartless, um, which is just a very irreverent podcast, hosted by 3 celebrities interviewing celebrities. So I don't know that it offers any particularly valid wisdom, but it's absolutely hilarious to me. And it did make me just really think about how I need to laugh more. I've also been rewatching. I'm like, where are the Meg Ryan rom-coms? Like I've watched, When Harry Met Sally, and I just watched You've Got Mail, and I was like, I just feel very nostalgic I need to rewatch all the Nancy Meyers movies. Like I'm in that mood. For some reason, I just want some lightness and some comedy. That feels really good right now, I think.
Oh, I'm completely with you. I really struggle. And I'll put this out there. Can people still sort of start making movies that are like fun and funny? And I think we all need that kind of that light relief. And I feel that, look, I mean, I love art films as much as anyone. And I definitely used to watch them more when I was younger. But I think we need to kind of have that lightness in our life. And I feel that it's so hard to find. Even so many of those shows on Netflix, and they're so dark, so many of them. And it's like, I don't need that. I need some
No, I think
lightness.
yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, I was so sad. I felt like Ted Lasso kind of gave that to us for a couple of years in the pandemic, but that's gone now. And I want just something frothy and fun. I'm, one of only like 3 humans in the world that hasn't seen Barbie yet. I know it's supposed to be
I haven't either.
both
So
fantastic, but it's also, a wonderful feminist message, which I am fully supportive of. But I'm also like, I just want, a bouquet of sharpened pencils. Like that's just I'm missing that little vibe in my life right now.
well, hopefully we've put it out there and it will start to filter through the cosmos or
Yes,
however it works. So
Nancy Myers, make another movie.
yeah, finally, what piece of advice would you give to your younger self?
That's a wonderful question too. That is a really fantastic one. I would say, be kinder to yourself. Um, it's going to be okay. Be kinder to yourself in all facets, in the in how you look and how you show up in the world, in how you show up at work, what you're accomplishing. Just recognize that if you're doing your best, that's all you can do, and that's good enough. I think we can be really, really hard on ourselves, especially as
Yeah.
women.
Yeah. And in this kind of day of social media and all of those things, definitely. I think
Hmm.
it's a challenging time at times, but no, I think that's a beautiful note to end on. Well, thank you so much, Erin. I've really enjoyed learning more about your story, and your passion for design is so tangible. So really exciting to see what you create with Studio Trovato, and yeah, it's really exciting. So thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really enjoyed your conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Natalie. I've got all of your books stacked right in my design book library. You've been such an inspiration to me for so many years. It's just an honor to get to talk with you.
Oh, thank you. All of the links and info for this episode are at nataliewalton.com/podcast. Don't forget to subscribe so that you can get a direct download of the latest episode. And I really appreciate when you take a minute to rate and review, as well as share the love with someone you know who might benefit from this episode, or on social media. If you'd like to access a range of free resources, come visit my website, nataliewalton.com. Thank you to Jaeger Media for producing this podcast. And I would also like to acknowledge the people of the Bundjalung Nation where it was recorded, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I look forward to connecting again soon. I'm Natalie Walton, and you've been listening to Imprint.